Welcome to Dialing In Your Coffee Business, where we help cafe and roastery owners build a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including them. I'm Michael Ryan. I'm a certified business coach and consultant that helps cafe and roastery owners build a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including them. On today's episode, we're unpacking another one of our foundational frameworks. Historically, we've only covered these with our one-on-one clients. I'm very excited to introduce this foundational framework to you today. The foundational framework we're discussing today is called the 6 tiers of transformation. 6 tiers of transformation. There are 6 levels. And in some ways, it will be helpful to think of these as 6 major obstacles to transformation. And I'm excited to dive into this with you because any type of change or transformation or progression, growth, optimization, whatever word you want to use, change for the better, if you want to think of it that way, will have these 6 tiers to it. And if it's helpful to think of them in terms of hurdles or obstacles, these are hurdles, meaning you're going to have to overcome these things. They are obstacles, meaning you're going to have to learn how to navigate around these things. But this is a foundational framework. No matter the topic, this foundational framework is always going to be at play. It's always going to be underneath. And we will talk about specific examples so that I can show you how these 6 tiers of transformation are underneath the process at all times. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that this podcast is an extension of our coaching and consulting. It's a part of our effort to make all of the tools necessary to build a healthy coffee business zero cost to everyone. In keeping with that theme, I'd like to thank one of today's sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by our How to Start a Cafe online on-demand course. If you've ever dreamed of opening up a coffee shop, this 12-module course will take all the guesswork out of the process. The course is taught by Maxwell Mooney, and he distills everything he learned from opening up multiple coffee shops into this course. You can access this course and all of our other on-demand courses at threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com/courses. As a listener of the podcast, you get a unique discount code, so be sure to enter the code PODCAST100, all caps, to get $100 off your online course. That's threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com/courses and enter the code PODCAST100 to get $100 off any of our online courses. So, what are the 6 tiers of transformation? Well, first, I want to talk about transformation in general. Again, change for the better. Change for the better is something that most people do not understand. They've never thought about it. They've never been taught anything that's helpful or useful in that arena. So I want to talk a little bit about transformation or change for the better. Most of the people that I talk to, most of the one-on-one clients that we take on, think about change for the better in terms of 3 main things, none of which are true and none of which are useful. The first, most obvious agent of transformation is effort. Most people assume that transformation requires tremendous effort, but that is a mental model that does not match reality. That is a mental map that does not match the territory. That's a foundational framework that doesn't actually work. It doesn't actually yield the results people think it should yield. Just like a map is judged on its usefulness, specifically its ability to get you to the point A to point B that it promises you. And if it does not yield that journey, if it does not get you to point B, you would discard it immediately. So too is this foundational framework, this mental map does not work. Effort does not equal transformation. Now, for most of you, this is good news because when we say transformation or change for the better, it sounds like it could be potentially exhausting and require a ton of effort. And I absolutely get it. I absolutely feel you. I was just talking with my wife the other day. There's an irony in being overwhelmed specifically because when we're overwhelmed, we want things to change. But what is change? It in and of itself, it can be overwhelming. And so if we're overwhelmed and we want to change, but change itself is overwhelming, we can pretty quickly feel stuck and trapped. So if you have ever been there, if you are currently there, I absolutely understand. That makes total sense. I have good news for you. Transformation does not require effort, or not tremendous effort. Maybe some effort, a small amount, but not applied in the ways that most people will think. We're not going to be aiming to push a rock uphill. If we're going to apply any effort at all, it's going to be to, instead of, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the incline of my hand is uphill. We're not talking about pushing a rock uphill. If anything, we're going to be talking about how to change the pitch so that you're rolling a rock downhill. So the changing of the pitch might require a little bit of effort. But in general, tremendous effort does not work. And when we're talking about transformation, that's not what we're advocating for. So that's what we're not talking about today. The other thing we're not talking about today is discipline. Many people think you need tremendous discipline in order to transform and succeed. And there are people building their entire platforms around the concept of discipline. Discipline is a misdirect. Discipline is pointing at something, but it's not the actual thing we need to be going for. Discipline does not work, especially for people who are just beginning to embark on this process. Now, once something has become habitual, we might refer to it as a discipline. And if you've ever done something that you've done it over time, you've done it long enough that it's habitual. For example, working out on a regular basis, just as an example. When I share with clients that I work out every single day, first of all, technically I do not work out every literal single day. I miss days. That's human nature. That's life. But my general goal, and I would say I do this 80 to 95% of the time, is to work out every single day. And the number one thing people say to me is that I must be an incredibly disciplined person. That's not actually true. I'm not super disciplined at all. Second of all, I have learned from doing it that I feel better when I do it. So you have to ask yourself this question. If something makes you feel good, does it require discipline to do it? The answer is no. Discipline is a misdirect. It shifts the focus off of the actual thing that's working, that's at play, and onto something else. So discipline is not actually the thing that equals freedom, as they say. It's the realization that doing something that's good for you is good for you. And by that, I mean it feels good. And so you do it. Now, you will not want to do it every single day. And even if you talk to those people who espouse this, they do not do it every single day, but they do it most days. And they do it even when they don't want to, because they have learned that there's a payoff. But the discipline is not the point. The payoff is the point. Once our brains connect our current situation to the future payoff, I would not describe that as discipline. If anything, that's hedonic adaptation. You actually want to do that because you know it will make you feel good. The reverse is true. We generally, over time, we stop doing things that make us feel bad. Now, there's a whole plethora of conversations around that. But my encouragement to you is, if you think transformation requires a tremendous effort, I would submit to you that it's not true and it's not useful. If you think it requires tremendous discipline, again, I would say it's not true and it's not useful. Third and finally, I would say the most common thing people think transformation requires is tremendous willpower. Willpower is something that's being actively researched, and so it's possible that more information will come to light. But in general, willpower is limited and it decreases throughout the day. So I don't bet on it. My ability to get myself going is limited and it decreases throughout the day. Now, this is why I work out first thing in the morning, because I tend to be more successful if I plan on that versus other times of the day. In my experience, even if there is research pointing against this, it's most helpful to think of willpower as limited. Now, if you have read research that demonstrates that willpower is not limited, I'm going to say that that's probably true, but not very useful. It's actually more helpful to think of willpower as limited. There is research that indicates that. And even if there is research that says the opposite, I would say it's still more useful to think of it as limited resource and focus on other things when it comes to change for the better. So if transformation is not a function of effort, if transformation is not a function of discipline, transformation is not a function of willpower, what then is it? And it is these 6 tiers, it is these 6 hurdles, it is these 6 questions you're going to have to answer if you want to embark on a journey of transformation. And it's actually really, really simple. I'd like to take a brief moment and thank another one of today's sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by our How to Start a Cafe group coaching cohort. This 12-week cohort is led by Maxwell Mooney, and he meets with the group weekly to walk you through the 12 modules that follow our online course, How to Start a Cafe. But it is much more than that. In addition to access to the course and the group coaching calls, you get access to our private Slack community, access to group call recordings, as well as a link to book one-on-one calls with us during your 12-week cohort. You can watch the full trailer for this group coaching program and all of our group coaching programs at threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com/group-coaching. And for our podcast listeners, be sure to enter the code podcast500 to get $500 off your 12-week cohort. That's threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com/group-coaching and enter the code podcast500, all caps, to get $500 off your 12-week cohort. The 6 tiers of transformation are the who, what, when, where, why, how, and when. It's those things related to the specific arena you want to transform. When we talk about the when, for example, this could be the timing of the issue, or it could be the season of life you're in, or the time of year you're in. So the when is a huge part of the question. I'll unpack this all in a second, but just stick with me here. The when is the timing and or the season of life. As they say, the right thing at the wrong time is still the wrong thing. So the when of the equation is always super important. It would be like if you want to read more books, but you read them in the middle of the night without the light on. Well, that's not a very good when. It's also not a very good where. If you choose a place that has no light in the middle of the night, it's not a great environment. It's not a great location for embarking on something like reading more books. There's the when and there's the where. There's also the what, the specific behaviors and actions. And this is what most people think of when they think of transformation. Just tell me what to do. Yeah, but if I don't tell you when to do it or where to do it, then the what might not work for you. Like I just said, I work out in the morning because that's the when that is most likely to lead to the transformation that I want to embark on. The where in that analogy or in that example is my basement gym. Why? Because I will not go to a gym outside my house. And so the where is incredibly important. Again, if in this example of working out every day, the when, first thing in the morning, the where, in my basement, so I don't have to go to the gym because that would just be an additional obstacle I don't need. The what we could talk about, that's usually what most people are thinking of, like how many sets of this and that and how much cardio versus strength and resistance training, all of that. That's generally what people want to talk about. But there's more to it than that. The how is also important. If, again, using this analogy of like working out every day, if somebody says, oh, do 3 sets of 12 chest presses, there is a right way to do that and a wrong way to do that. There is more helpful ways and less helpful ways to do, let's say, a chest press or a bicep curl. The how of the equation is incredibly important. Anybody who works out at all or does anything at all will tell you that you can go through the motions, but if you don't do the thing correctly, if you don't understand the how behind it, again, you will not experience the transformation. But there's more to it than even that. Next is the why. The why. What do we believe about this thing? What about this is a part of our values as a person or as a business? The why behind it is incredibly important as well. What do we believe about this? What do we value about this? If I want to work out just because I should work out, that's not a value statement. That's not a belief statement. However, if I want to work out because I want to live my best life and be the best father and husband I can be, and also live longer so that I can continue to be the best husband and father I want to be, that's a belief. That's a value statement. That's a why for working out on a regular basis. Again, I'm just using this as an example to give this some teeth. We're going to talk about business specific examples in a second. Finally is the who. This is an identity statement. Who am I? A lot of people don't realize that how they see themselves is the actual reason they don't do the thing. If I think of myself, if my identity is I am a lazy person, or I am not a person who works out, if that's my identity statement, we're never going to experience transformation. We're never going to say work out every day or whatever. If our literal identity is something that is not that. They've done tons of research on this. One of the most famous examples is asking people if they would vote and asking people if they consider themselves a voter. If you would vote is a behavior action statement. It's a what. Are you a voter is a who statement. That's an identity statement, and it's much more powerful. As a general rule, our brain will experience cognitive dissonance if we try to engage in something that does not match our identity. If I think of myself as somebody who does not work out, and then I try to work out, my brain would be in a state of cognitive dissonance because I'm trying to do something that I know is not my identity. That's going to be a hurdle I have to overcome. That's going to be an obstacle I have to address. So identity is the who, beliefs and values is the why, abilities and techniques is the how, behaviors and actions is the what, environment and location is the where, and timing and or the season of your life is the when. These are the 6 tiers of transformation. If you do not address these 6 tiers, you will not experience change for the better. You will not experience the transformation that is in fact available to you. But these are, if it's helpful to think of them as 6 hurdles you have to jump over in this process. Now, that does take some effort, but identifying hurdles and spacing them out and jumping over them in sequence is a different type of effort than trying to smash through all 6 hurdles. And, imagine you're running a 100-meter dash, but there's hurdles there, and you're not acknowledging that, you're not adapting your strategy, versus a person who runs the 110-meter hurdles. It's a part of the whole thing as far as they're concerned. The hurdles are there, they train for it, they space them out, they count them out, they know how many steps it will require in between hurdles, and they know when to jump. It's a totally different mindset. Technically, they both have the same goal to run, about the same distance and get from point A to point B. But the person who's running the hurdles has a better set of expectations, a more realistic set of expectations, a mental map that matches the territory, a mental model that matches reality. You're much more like a person running the 110-meter hurdles than you are a person running the 100-meter dash. And by that, I mean the way is obstructed by these hurdles, but you're not going to smash through them. That's not the encouragement. The encouragement is to identify them, space them out, and jump over them in sequence. So let's talk about the sequence for a second. The first is often the when of the equation, the timing. It could be the time of day that works best for you, and this will be based on a lot of things, your schedule, for example, also your chronotype, for example, and we'll do a whole episode on those things. But timing is the when of the equation. It could be the time of day, it could be the season of life, or it could be a year rhythm, an annual rhythm. Like I tend to review my life plan, my personal life plan in January. That just feels like the right time to do it. And if I miss that and I try to do it other times, I'm less likely to do it. January tends to be the time that I feel most engaged with that process. The next is the where, the environment of the equation. It could be the location that I'm in. It could be the social construct that I'm in. It could be the culture that I come from, or it could be the culture that I'm currently immersed in. When I was studying abroad in Spain, everything was different because of the where. Next is the what, our behaviors and actions, our habits and our routines. What do we do? And is it conducive to the things that we say we want to do? If you are somebody who wants to wake up early, but the what of the equation is what do you currently do? I currently, stay up super late, binge watching Netflix. No guilt, shame, or judgment, but I'm going to say it's going to make it harder to wake up early the next morning if you're up till 3 a.m. watching, Peacock or Hulu or whatever subscription service you subscribe to. I'm just saying it's going to be harder if you operate in that way. Next is the how, the abilities, the techniques, the trainings, and sometimes even the giftings, things that just come naturally to you. The why is your beliefs and your values. Do you believe this is important? Do you believe it's good? Do you believe it's valuable? Do you believe it's possible? And finally, the who. What is your identity? What kind of person do you think of yourself as? Do you think of yourself as worthy of this? Do you think of yourself as somebody who deserves this kind of goodness? I talk to a lot of coffee business owners who don't believe they are worthy of flourishing. That's an identity statement. It's not the when or the where or the what or the how or the why. It's the who. They don't actually think of themselves as somebody who is worthy of flourishing. And I totally get it. It totally makes sense. And I've totally been there. What I'm mostly saying is that that's an issue of identity. It's an issue of who you see yourself as. I'd like to take a brief moment and thank another one of today's sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by our one-on-one coaching program. Whether you're in the startup process or you've already opened up your cafe and roastery, our one-on-one coaching program is for people who are ready for a personalized touch and a proven process to follow. This 12-month program takes you through 3 major phases where we make sure you as the owner are flourishing. We make sure the business is flourishing. And finally, we make sure the staff is flourishing. Not because staff is least important, but because this is the only process that actually works. When you join one-on-one coaching, you get access to all of our group coaching materials, including recordings and the private Slack community. In addition to that, you get a standing one-on-one meeting with us where we walk you through how to ensure that you are flourishing as the owner, how to ensure your business is flourishing, and of course, how to ensure your staff is flourishing. For one-on-one coaching, we prioritize people who have taken our courses and or joined our group coaching. But you can always reach out to us and schedule a strategy call so that we can be helpful and see if one-on-one coaching is a good fit for you. Just go to our website, threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com, and click the link to book a strategy call. So these are the 6 tiers of transformation. A lot of these precepts and principles pair perfectly with our other foundational framework, the false dichotomy framework. And so I'm going to actually use the same 3 examples that I used in that episode to talk about the 6 tiers of transformation, because these things go together. They link together. If you're inside of false dichotomy thinking, you're going to apply that false dichotomy thinking to these 6 tiers of transformation. So in that episode, we talked about the 3 kind of most common examples that I see with coffee shop owners and roastery owners. And that's the false dichotomy of money versus people. It's the false dichotomy of owners being taken care of versus staff being taken care of. And it's the false dichotomy of a hyper rigid schedule versus something that is flexible, bordering on chaotic, really. So let's talk about those examples. In a false dichotomy, we tend to think of things as either or. So it's either money or it's people. They're generally positioned as combative, and they're generally thought of as on a spectrum. They'd be either end of the spectrum, kind of extreme option A, extreme option B, and usually they're presented as mutually exclusive, meaning there's nothing else available. There's just extreme option A or extreme option B, nothing else, and certainly no combination of those two. They are mutually exclusive. Well, especially if you're inside of that false dichotomy framework, you're going to find yourself thinking things like this. When it comes to the when of a conversation, like, hey, how do money and people actually make sense? How can I take good care of people and make enough money to stay open? A lot of the obstacles that we'll face will be a function of when, timing, and season. Hey, what it looks like to take great care of people with the money that you have and make enough money so that you can take great care of all of the people, including yourself as the owner. What it looks like will be a function of the when. And by that, I mean, are you open yet? That's part of your when. Where are you in the journey? What season of business is this? If you're not yet open, this will look different. What if you just opened? What if you have been open for a while, but you only have 1 or 2 locations? If we're talking about making enough money to take great care of people, you might be too small to reasonably offer healthcare right this second. The principles don't change, but the way we apply them will be specific to the when of your situation. There's also the where. That plays a part in the conversation. Again, think of these as hurdles you're going to have to jump over. The timing in the season is one hurdle. The environment and location, the where, is another hurdle. What if your cafes are in a really bad location, like just nobody can get to where you are physically? They have to, go through 17 stoplights on a one-way street, then make a U-turn, then come back those same 17 stoplights just to get to your cafe because there's a cement barrier in between, the lane they were in and your cafe. That's an environment location. That's a where question. Or you might be in a state or a city that just has laws written a certain way or minimum wage set at a certain dollar amount that makes it either difficult or at least just different in terms of how we're going to apply these principles, how we're going to take great care of people and make enough money to stay in business. Those are all a function of where you are physically located. Let's talk about behaviors and actions. A lot of people just want this part. What do I need to do? One of the things we don't realize is that sometimes transformation is a function of doing the right things, the what of the equation, and sometimes it's a function of discontinuing behaviors and actions that don't lead to what we want, or they conflict with what we want. So a lot of times when it's money and people, a lot of owners don't want to change what they're doing. They do want to take better care of people, or they do want to take better care of themselves, but they don't actually want to change the behaviors and the actions that they're engaged in, even though they know that those behaviors and actions don't lead to where they want to go. We don't often realize that if we want to go somewhere different, we often have to do something different. That's a behavior and action. That's a what question. You may be not currently managing your cash flow, or you may be managing it in a way that makes it difficult to take really great care of people, including yourself. So we might teach you a behavior and action. We might teach you a cash flow management system, but you're going to have to stop doing the one that you're doing most likely and adopt the one that we're suggesting, assuming that it works, and it does. But my point is, you're going to have to stop doing something and you have to start doing something else. And that's almost always the case if you're interested in transformation. What about abilities and techniques? That's the how of the equation. A lot of people feel stuck here. They don't know how to make more money with their business, or they don't know how to take better care of people with the money they have inside of their business. It's a abilities and techniques question. They're just not actually sure how the pieces fit together. They understand they need to implement, a new cash flow management system, but they're really not sure how all those pieces fit together. That's a real and valid hurdle in the transformation process. Let's talk about beliefs and values, though. A lot of times when I say it's important to learn how to take great care of people with money, people will say, well, I don't value money. I value people. Again, that's an either or statement, as though those things are mutually exclusive. And if you're somebody who values people and does not value money, that's amazing. But if you're viewing that as mutually exclusive, if you're viewing that as a false dichotomy, then the problem is you'll think that you don't have to worry about making money, and then there won't be any money to take great care of the people. So a beliefs and values shift here would look something like, I love that you value people. I actually need you to value money a little bit more, just so that there's enough of it to take great care of all those people. That's part of the transformation process, but that's a hurdle a lot of people are unwilling or unable to jump over, to go from I only care about people, I don't care about money, to I value both people and money. Specifically, I value money because it allows me to take better care of people. That's a values shift. Finally is an identity shift. For people who are viewing themselves as not a greedy person, or I'm not in this for the money, an identity shift, that's the who of the equation. Who am I? How do I see myself as an owner, as a business person? If I see myself as not a greedy person, and I assume that the only kind of person that would care about money or focus on money is a greedy person, if somebody comes along and says, hey, you need to focus more on money, it sounds like I'm advocating for you to shift your identity from not a greedy person to being, in fact, a greedy person. But that's not the identity shift that we're actually talking about. What we're talking about is being a wise business owner who focuses just enough on keeping gas in the tank so that nobody gets stranded in the middle of the desert. That's a different who, that's a different identity in the context of money versus people. What about the false dichotomy of owner's needs versus staff needs? Again, these are often pitted against each other as though there's no combination, there's no possibility of a win-win. Especially if you're inside of that false dichotomy. If we talk about things like the timing and the season of your needs and your staff's needs, well, a lot of owners will get themselves into potentially avoidable situations, but once they're in them, it's difficult to assess what it would look like to take care of the needs of the staff and take care of their own needs. Maybe a silly example, but a very real example is the when of the equation. If we're talking about a business that takes great care of the staff's needs and the owner's needs, part of the question I have to ask is, when specifically are we talking about? For example, have you scheduled yourself to be on bar just this moment we're talking about? If so, I'm going to recommend that you fulfill that commitment to be on bar. That's the when of the equation. If you have scheduled yourself to be on bar, Don't just leave your team in order to go meet your needs. Now, if you have to use the restroom or something like that, that's not what I'm talking about. I know a lot of owners that will schedule themselves on bar, and then they'll hear me say that they should be doing a better job of taking care of their needs, and so they'll just hop off bar and leave their team. That's not what I'm talking about. You're going to have to overcome this particular hurdle when it comes to staff needs versus owners' needs, and you're going to have to address the when of the equation. What's the timing? What's the season? It's going to look different in every single season. Environment and location, then, the where of the equation. Hey, if you just opened versus you have 5 cafes and you're in one of those cafes versus you're in your roastery, it's going to depend what it looks like to get your needs met and the needs of your staff met. It's going to depend on where you physically are, like geographically. Same thing with like state and local and city laws. Those things play into it. The laws in your particular area for meeting your staff's needs versus your own needs when it comes to like paid vacation, time off, that kind of stuff. That's going to depend on where you are specifically. The what of the equation, the behaviors and actions, the things. A lot of owners think that the things they have to do, only they can do because everybody else would hate doing those things. That's the what of the equation. That's a specific part of the transformation process, is addressing the what. If there's a what, if there's an action, a behavior, a task that you hate doing, building a business that takes great care of your staff and you will include learning how to find somebody who loves doing the thing you hate. Now you might say, nobody would love doing that thing. I hate it, so everybody must hate it. That's a false statement. It's neither true nor useful. A lot of people don't like doing dishes, but I like doing dishes. A lot of people don't like taking out the trash, but I like taking out the trash. A lot of people don't like scrubbing the floors. I don't like scrubbing the floors either, but I know people who do. My point is, just because I don't like something does not mean everybody doesn't like something. A lot of the what in this one is identifying people who love doing the things you hate doing. Then there's the how, the abilities and techniques. When I talk about owners taking good care of themselves, a lot of people think the how is some sort of Parks and Rec, treat yourself, like going and getting manis and petties. That might be your how, but that's not really what I mean. And I certainly don't mean the treat yourself, sort of self-indulgent, extravagant sort of self-care that is sometimes put out there. Now, there may be some times and places, again, the time, the when, the places, the where that's actually the thing you want to be doing. I'm imagining maybe you're at a bachelor or bachelorette party and that's what you all are doing. Okay, that's great. That's fine. But that's not necessarily the how. The how is what is actually going to meet your needs such that you can continue to create something that meets the needs of everybody else. If you meet none of your needs, that will lead you to burnout and exhaustion. If you only meet all of your needs and nobody else's, that's going to lead a different direction where nobody's going to want to work with you. So we're looking for this middle space, but the specific how is going to depend on your personality, your, what you like doing, what's life-giving to you. For me, it's usually sitting alone and reading a book. That's one of the things that I like doing, but that is certainly not something that everybody enjoys. And it's certainly not what I'm going to say when it comes to owners meeting your needs. Carving out 30 minutes a day to read is not necessarily going to qualify as you feeling like you're meeting your needs. So the how is going to be specific to you, but it is, again, it's a hurdle you're going to have to plan for and jump over in this process of transformation. But it's still less effort than trying to plow through all of these hurdles as though they're not even there. Next is a function of your beliefs and values, your why. If you don't believe self-care is important, or you don't believe your needs matter, or you believe that humility means putting yourself last and or never taking care of yourself, or thinking less of yourself, or even if you think humility is thinking of yourself less, all of those things are belief and values statements. And if somebody says, hey, the business should take care of your staff's needs and your needs, that might conflict with an underlying belief that you have about humility. That leads us into your who and your identity. If it sounds like I'm advocating for you to become a self-centered person and you think of yourself as a selfless person, that's going to be a huge barrier. It's going to be a huge obstacle. It's going to be a huge hurdle, especially because that's not what we're actually advocating for. We're simply saying when the mask drops down, you put your own mask on first so that you can sustainably and effectively take care of other people. But if you see yourself as not a self person, or a core part of your identity is I'm a humble person, but to you, humility means you never take care of yourself. Or maybe you're somebody who thinks of themselves as the perpetual martyr. You're always falling on your sword. If that's a part of your identity, and then we say your business should take good care of you and your staff, the idea of your business taking care of you is going to conflict with your identity, how you see yourself. That's going to be a hurdle in your transformation process, learning to see yourself in a new way as somebody who is worthy of being taken care of, somebody who allows the business to take great care of them without it meaning that you're a selfish or self-centered person. The third example we gave that we'll use again is the idea of a consistent and or regular schedule. Now, again, this is where people drop into a false dichotomy where they think it's either a hyper rigid schedule or flexibility, but usually flexibility is actually chaos in disguise. Well, specifically, when I say a regular, somewhat consistent schedule, that's going to depend on your when. What season of life are you in? If you just had your first kid ever 2 days ago, and somebody like me says you should aim to have a regular schedule, the season of life you're in, is going to be a huge part of that conversation. And it's going to be completely different if you just had your first kid a couple days ago versus you just had your fourth kid, and your oldest is 10 years old. It's going to be a completely different conversation because of the when of it, the season of life in this instance. Or maybe you just opened your very first cafe. Okay, a fixed hour schedule is probably not going to look quite the same as it will look as the clients that I work with who have 5 cafes and a roastery. Then they're mostly disconnected from the day to day. So the specific when, timing, and season of it is going to be different. There's also the where of it, the environment and location. When I talk about a fixed hour schedule, there's going to be things, a consistent schedule for when you're physically at work. What about when you're kind of on the clock, but you're at home, sort of working remotely? What about when you're off the clock and at home? There's going to be different contexts based on where you are and what a fixed hour schedule or a regular schedule looks like. Going back to just the when for a second, there's also different parts of the day. We talk a lot with our one-on-one clients about a morning routine or a morning ritual and an evening routine or an evening ritual. So the level of structure or specificity in the schedule will also flex with the day part that I'm referring to. So not just your season of life when, but also the hour of the day. The first couple hours of the day and the last couple hours of the day carry disproportionate weight in our brains because of the primacy and recency principles. So how you spend the first 15 minutes of your day, I'm usually going to recommend that's actually pretty rigid, pretty incredibly structured, so that from then on, it can actually be really flexible, like really flexible. But I often will encourage people to think in terms of when it comes to scheduling and a regular rhythm and routine, just focusing on the first couple minutes, maybe the first hour of your day, and being a little bit more intentional, a little bit more rigid, a little bit, not super rigid, especially if you just had your first kid, right? Or you just opened your first cafe. That's a season of life question. But then there's the timing, the hour of the day that plays into it. These are all parts of the when in the 6 tiers of transformation. Next is the behaviors and actions. This is the what again. When it comes to something like a consistent rhythm or routine, there is the what should I do, and there's the what should I not do. And more specifically, there's going to be what events should I be a little bit more structured with, and what events should I generally intentionally not be super structured with. I heard a story once of somebody who was trying to apply this principle of kind of a regular routine, a regular schedule, and somewhat of a structured, existence, but they scheduled a breakup with a significant other, and they scheduled it to take 15 minutes. That's a great example of a what should you not schedule. Would be 15 minutes for a breakup, because that's a misapplication of this principle. Should you never schedule anything? No, that would be the other end of the spectrum. So there's going to be, when it comes to behaviors and actions, when it comes to this idea of like a regular schedule or routine, there's going to be things that you don't schedule that don't fit into a routine. And there's going to be things that naturally you do want to schedule. They do fit into a rhythm and routine. Then there's the abilities and the techniques, the how of the conversation. A lot of times when I talk to people about having a regular routine or some sort of schedule, they'll tell me about how they tried this particular system that didn't work very well. Well, that's a real and valid hurdle, but that's a hurdle related to the how of it, the ability and the technique. How do I do this schedule thing you're talking about in a way that doesn't make me feel captive, so that we're not going towards the one extreme of hyper rigidity, but we're also not going to the other extreme of just complete pure chaos? Then there's the beliefs and values, the why. Do you think that a consistent schedule isn't valuable? Do you not see the value in having regular rhythms and routines in your life? Do you not believe that it's important? That's a really common hurdle that people have to address. They have to overcome. A lot of people don't see the value in it, or they've not thought too much about it. One of the most obvious examples to sort of begin to illustrate how this is important is just to talk about your sleep schedule. For starters, most people will intuitively understand that they should be getting a certain amount of sleep. Generally, the number that gets thrown around is 8 hours. Let's use that for a second. Most people understand they should be getting about 8 hours once in a while or on a regular basis. And most people, furthermore, can intuit that going to bed around the same time and waking up around the same time is going to be most advantageous to their sleep-wake schedule. What is that? That's a consistent rhythm and routine. That's a fixed hour schedule. That is the healthy balance of not rigidity in every aspect of life, but also not pure chaos. If you went to bed at 9 p.m. one night and then 5 p.m. the next night and then 3 a.m. the night after that, we all intuitively understand that that would be less than ideal for our human person. That's all we're talking about when we talk about a fixed hour schedule or consistent rhythm and routine. That's what we mean. It's that kind of stuff. It turns out that every cell in our body has a biological clock. Every cell has a circadian rhythm that is either synced up with all the other cells or slowly getting further and further apart, creating a physical discomfort if it goes too far, and unhealth if it goes even further. So a consistent rhythm and routine is a universal natural law. It's a natural principle. But if we haven't thought about it, we might not believe it's valuable, or we might not see the value in it. Again, that's something we will have to address. That's a hurdle in the transformation process. If you don't believe it's valuable, of course you're not going to do it. But the question is it valuable or not? And have you done enough research? Have you thought about it enough to realize that it is, in fact, extremely valuable? You just might not currently realize it. Last but certainly not least in this particular conversation is the identity component, the who of it. And this is the absolute number one pushback I get on this particular suggestion. When I say it's advantageous to have regular rhythms and routines, a fixed hour schedule, days that look mostly the same, not completely the same, don't hear me wrong, but mostly the same. And by mostly, I just mean 51%. We already talked about going to bed at more or less the same time and waking up at more or less the same time. Well, that's 33% of your day right there. So when I say mostly the same, I just mean rhythms and routines that make up about 51% of your total waking hours. If you go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time-ish, and then you do more or less the same things for the first hour and more or less the same things for the last couple hours of the day, which we'll talk about in different episodes, specifically what you might consider doing. That's it right there. I'm not talking about 100% of your time being ultra scheduled. But when people hear me say rhythms and routines, structure, fixed hour schedule, almost always, invariably, somebody will say, that's not who I am. That's who you are, they'll say to me, even though that's not true. They don't know, but they assume that I must be one of those people. They make a statement or assumption about who I must be. That's fine. But then they make an identity statement about who they are. I'm just not that kind of person. I'm a go with the flow type person. I'm a flexible, free person. Those are all identity statements. I'm not a rigid person. I'm not a schedule person. I'm not a planner person. Those are all who statements. Those are all identity statements. If you want to change for the better, if you want to go through the process of transformation, effort is not going to do it. Discipline's not going to do it either. Willpower is limited and it decreases throughout the day. None of those are viable solutions. The most helpful framework I'm aware of is this foundational framework of the 6 tiers of transformation. It's like 110-meter hurdles with 6 hurdles spaced out. The when, the where, the what, the how, the why, and the who. Generally in that order. If you want to experience transformation in a real and lasting way, you're not going to power through and you're not going to rely on tremendous discipline. Most people don't have enough discipline to facilitate that type of transformation. You're going to want to ask yourself, what is the thing I'm trying to do? What is the change I'm trying to facilitate for the better? What is the transformation I'm trying to undergo? And then what is the when, the where, the what, the how, the why, and the who of it? If you draw them out as a pyramid, with the bottom being the when and the who being the pinnacle, and give yourself those 6 tiers of transformation, you're going to be well on your way to identifying the 6 hurdles that are likely going to be in your way in that process. Now, depending on the transformation you're trying to undergo, it may not require much in all 6 tiers. There might be some that are already pretty aligned. You might have already actually gotten the when or the where of it ironed out. Or the who might actually already be in alignment. It's just the when and the where that's out of alignment. I can't say specifically without knowing your situation a little bit more closely. What I can say is that this framework, this foundational framework, is incredibly helpful and useful in facilitating transformation that requires much less effort, much less discipline, and much less willpower, because all of those are unreliable at best. There's always going to be a process of moving from no awareness to awareness. And so I hope during the course of this episode, you feel like you've at least become aware of this foundational framework. Next, I would just encourage you to pay attention. You'll likely see examples of this in other people's lives, but please don't go and judge those people. You might see it more readily in somebody else's life, but hopefully you'll use that as a way to then reflect on yourself, your own self, and see where you are getting stuck in your transformation process. Is it a when? I was talking with one business owner who was trying to watch one of our courses when they were on bar pulling shots. And I just, instead of trying to power through that and use a bunch of effort or discipline or willpower, I just told them, don't do that. Don't try to watch a course when you're on bar. Do it at another time. In fact, not just when you're on bar, but where you are. If you're in the cafe, it's not going to be a good time either. Pick a different when and a different where to watch the course. And even if it's only 5 minutes at a time, 15 minutes at a time, just don't do it at that time and in that place, because you will just never gain traction that way. Pay attention though to where you feel like you're getting stuck. Then, and always beginning with yourself, you can take action. Action to change the when, change the where, even the what, the how, the why, and the who. The most difficult ones to change are the why and the who. To reassess our beliefs and values, to reassess our identity, those are the hardest of all of the levels in my experience. Personally, from undergoing transformation, those are the hardest. It's so difficult to reassess our beliefs and our value system, and it's even harder to reassess our identity. But it will be necessary, as hard as it is. And if you're experiencing, friction in those ones especially, I absolutely feel you. There's absolutely no guilt or shame or judgment. And I will still say, you will have to change your identity and you will have to assess your belief systems. And maybe that's with the help of a licensed therapist, a good licensed therapist. I don't know specifically what your journey will be, but I will say it is possible. I can say that with certainty. And it is better if you learn to realize that you might have an identity statement that's holding you back from the transformation that you're trying to undergo. Or you might have an underlying value system or belief system that's holding you back from the transformation that you want to experience. I can't say specifically what will be the hardest level for you. I can only say in my own experience, it's the why and the who that generally are the most difficult. But all 6 are like hurdles in a 110-meter hurdle race that it's better to plan on just overcoming those one at a time versus pretending like they're not there and trying to run. Can you imagine what it would be like to run a 100-meter dash, pretending like there aren't any hurdles? You hit that first one and you're just going to crash and burn. So much more exhausting, especially if you don't think they should be there, right? If you've been told the whole thing should be effortless and smooth and you hit that first hurdle and you just crash and burn. I did track growing up, and I have seen more than my fair share of people hit that first hurdle and just crash. And it's so painful to watch. So if you've experienced that, I absolutely feel you. My hope is to kind of outline a more realistic, a more helpful, more accurate mental map for what it looks like to go from point A to point B. It looks like a lot more like jumping over these 6 hurdles to get to the finish line than it is a clear, sprint 100-meter dash style. I hope that's a helpful way to think about it. I hope these 6 tiers of transformation make sense. I hope they empower you. I hope you can begin to see where you might be stuck and why you might be stuck. And my hope is that it facilitates a deeper level of lasting transformation, maybe even deeper than you've ever experienced. Thank you so much for joining me today for my conversation on the 6 tiers of transformation. If you're enjoying this podcast, please consider subscribing on YouTube. That's a great zero-cost way to support this podcast. In addition, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple and Spotify. And on both Spotify and Apple, you can leave us up to a 5-star review. Please check out our online courses, our group coaching, and our one-on-one coaching. That's the absolute best way to support this podcast. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover or guests you'd like us to invite, please leave those in the comments section on YouTube. If you're not already following us on social media, we are at Threadbare Coffee Consulting on Instagram, and that's really the only platform we're active on. That's where I regularly post bite-sized thoughts on what it will take you, the owner, to build a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including you. The content we post on Instagram overlaps with the podcast, but it's generally distinct from anything we cover on this podcast. If you haven't already visited our website, we have a myriad of free tools and trainings for coffee shop and coffee roastery owners. Everything from calculating your cost of goods sold for both a cafe and a roastery, which is completely different, pricing, which again for a cafe and roastery is completely different, managing labor percentage in a way that takes great care of people, etc., etc. All of those tools and trainings are available at our website, threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. And last but not least, thank you for your interest in building a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including you.